we can begin. And we're going to do a quick walkthrough of the dashboard before we dive into really the crux of today, which is going to be talking about starting a brand new market report, getting into some of those details together. I'm just curious who I have in the room. So I might ask you to use that same raise your hand feature if this is your first time getting training in benchmarks. My first timers, would you mind raising your hand for me? I'm just curious how many of those I have. Awesome. Oh, quite a few. Great. So that's wonderful. Those of you who maybe this is a refresher, I'll speak to both talk tracks just because I know sometimes it's helpful to talk about maybe a higher level function. So we'll do both. But let's go ahead and get started. So, of course, this is the dashboard. This is what you'll see when you land on your homepage. So some things to look forward to. These two widgets here, these are connected to some reports. So maybe you're coming in and you're not sure what you need to do. You know, the tool is constantly tracking how your jobs are moving in the market. So we see that here with this hot jobs widget. You can click on this to see a report about your hot jobs. PayScale defines a hot job by any position in the market that's moved more than 3%. So we can click on that to see a report there. Right next door is another report in terms of looking at outliers based off of my market strategy. I have a structure in the tool. So those of you who are just getting started, you likely don't have this yet because maybe you don't have your structure loaded into the tool. No problem. Something to look forward to. Down below, recent activity, of course, is a feed for you. So for you, maybe the scenario is I want to go right back to the market report that I just ran, or I want to touch the job that I didn't maybe put all of the benchmark criteria in on. Go ahead and use this recent activity just to jump back in. It's a nice quick step. I also really like to give a shout out to this create a report button on that dashboard. Because in my opinion, really the fastest way to go ahead and get into the data right from your homepage. So maybe that scenario for you is I've got a meeting in 10 minutes. I need to come in here and create a report. From here, you could go ahead and price a brand new job. Maybe you're doing an ad hoc report, or you can select from your existing benchmarks from your homepage. So you can go ahead and refresh that data from your homepage also. So that's a really great way to hit the ground running right from your dashboard. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the lay of the land, how we can get around. Using this dark charcoal bar up at the top, you'll notice those are drop downs. So we're going to spend time in your jobs today, absolutely. This is where you'll find your benchmarks and your labor markets. These are the two components needed in order to run a market report. And you'll find those market reports right next door. So maybe you're coming in to an account that you've inherited from someone else. You're wondering, where can I see the data? This is where you can always find it. Right next door, strategy and analytics. This is more of an advanced part of the tool where you're ready to go ahead and create a structure, or maybe you want to see what kind of analytics are available to you. What you see at the bottom, your documents, is a repository or a Dropbox for you. So if you wanted to save documents into your platform, you can, absolutely. That's what's going to be in that strategy and analytics tab. So we're really going to stay in your jobs and market data today. Those are going to be our focus for this basic training. There's one more thing I want to call out about how the site is organized, and that is with projects. So in the top left-hand corner of your screen, you might notice a drop-down that says active workforce. That is the default kind of starting project for all of our clients. But you can absolutely have as many projects as you want. And I'll talk to you a little bit about maybe how you can use this. So like you see in my account, I have a few different projects going on. You know, maybe I want to try out a new scenario for my development team and my operations team. You know, I want to segment those particular jobs in their own folder. Think of them like file folders, honestly, because they have the exact same functionality of your active workforce. So if I come into my development project, exact same drop downs, exact same functionality, but honestly, it's just a great way to keep yourself organized. So I have some clients who, you know, maybe they're coming in here and pricing different departments, and they don't want all of those department reports in the same folder. That's a great use case for scenarios. Or maybe you're sharing your account with a lot of other people on your team, and you want your own folder. You only want to come in to see the jobs that you're working on. That's another common use case for projects. So that is exactly what this dropdown will allow you to do. Coming down to manage projects would just allow you to create a brand new folder for yourself if you wanted to utilize that functionality. So for today, I'm going to be working in my active workforce folder. So if you're following along, always a great place to check, like where's my work going to be saved? If I have multiple projects, which one am I working in? So that's a really handy call out from there. All right, so we're going to move over to your jobs. And the first place I want to go with you today is into the labor market section. The labor market section, for those of you who are new, this is going to be a good exercise. For those of you who this is a refresher, it's still, I think, a relevant and hopefully helpful conversation because the labor market part of the tool is really that very first step into how do you want to scope your data, or when you're benchmarking your jobs, what kind of organizations are you typically benchmarking against? So it's really thinking about what type of industry am I competing in for my jobs? What type of segment size am I competing in for my jobs? So my story today is, I'm competing across multiple industries for my talent. So I'm in the same city metro area, but my jobs kind of span this management consulting and science and engineering services industry. So I've got 2 labor markets. I also have 2 different segment sizes because I'm competing in 2 different segment sizes also. So thinking about what type of industry, what kind of segment is impactful for you. So my story today is I've actually been having a really hard time retaining my engineers within these 2 markets. I've noticed that there's been some attrition. So I want to come in and create another labor market. We are actually, PayScale is located in Seattle, and in Seattle, it's kind of a hub for technology. So a job like engineer is really in demand because there's a Expedia here, there's a Facebook here. So my talent pool, my labor markets don't reflect that right now. So I want to come in and create a new one. So up at the top, if you're following along with me, go ahead and move into that plus sign that says add, so we can add in a new labor market. All right, so if you've used traditional data sources before, this is the same idea of what type of data cuts have you used if you're maybe used to the more traditional surveys like Towers Watson or Mercer, what cuts were you using there? Because you want to come in and create a very similar cut within the PayScale data. So when it comes to display name, this very first question is a required field, but it doesn't have to be anything too difficult. Like for me today, I know I'm thinking about my engineering market, so I'm just going to call that what it is. In location scope, of course, this is where the tool is asking, where do you want to drop that pin down for data? So are you hoping to collect city metro, statewide, or the broadest data set, a national average? You absolutely can. I'm going to stick with city metro data. Country, if you're looking for data outside of the United States, PayScale does collect data, and you can see that what other countries do we have information in that drop down. I will say that we are the strongest in the United States and Canada. All right, so easy enough, plug in your cities there if you're going ahead with me on this journey, adding in a new labor market. So location scope, we've got that checked off the list. We can move on to the more strategic questions. So organization type. This is thinking about, again, your competitive talent pool. So maybe in your scenario, maybe you're coming in and pricing nursing jobs, then it's likely that hospital data is more relevant for you. Or maybe you've got teachers, and so you're wanting to price those in a school district data set. So again, what type of jobs do you have? What kind of data are you going to collect? It's likely if you're a nonprofit, you can maybe only afford to pay what other nonprofits pay. So it's coming in and defining that talent pool. A common question I get here is, what's the difference between private practice firm and company? I'm not sure. Private practice firm is thinking about your private practice law firm or your private practice chiropractor's office. So that's the difference between this option and company, which is just thinking about those general for-profit companies, which is what I want today. All right, now we're on to, I think, the more strategic question, which is industry. And I find a lot of people, this is a hard question, and I know it's difficult to have an industry in mind, but it's thinking about, again, your competitive talent pool. I have a lot of people come in and kind of fall into that trap of setting their labor markets up to look just like their own. But again, remember that story I'm trying to tell today. I'm actually competing in larger organizations for software developers and try to find that industry that's impacting those jobs. So here it's a keyword search. I could see, okay, here's a software development market. And in some cases, some are broken out into subcategories. We see that with those little carrots. But that just gives us the opportunity to say, okay, maybe I'm really just focusing in on SaaS, software as a service. That's really my focus. That's the market that I want to really zoom in on. I can just choose that subcategory. But I think what's also true for my engineering department in general, someone like a web app developer, they could really this whole family. The market is a little bit more fluid for that type of job. So I can choose the whole family, capture the broader average of that family, which is, I think, what I want to do today. And then the next question is segment size. So again, not what is your seat size, but if you're modeling this to look like a competitor, what size are they? So, I know those larger companies, I don't know the exact seat size they are, but I'm going to put in the number I'm comfortable with. So I'm going to say 10,000. I want to get an idea of how to size a large company pay for a job like an engineer. So annual revenue, you can include this as well. Again, it wouldn't be your annual revenue. It would be what would be the revenue of a large organization like I'm modeling this to be. So if I don't know that number, I can leave it blank, and that's no problem. Actually, sometimes being broad is a great strategy. So by that, I mean by leaving this question undefined, you can capture the broader average of all revenues. So that same logic could be applied to maybe seat size if you wanted to compete across all sizes. Just by leaving that question blank, you're capturing that broader average. So it can be flexible in that way. If you're not sure and you don't want to answer some questions, absolutely, you can do that. There's no wrong answer there. Government contractor is an option for those of you out there where things like security clearance impact your jobs. Go ahead and select that if that's relevant to you. There's one more page for us. And, I really find it helpful to think about your labor markets like a funnel. So the more information or the more criteria you enter, the more narrow your data set becomes. So that's a strategy for some. Some people want to leave their funnel for data more open. So I find that to be true, especially on this page, because things like filing status, pretty specific, pretty narrow data set. Or even stock exchange listing, if you know, again, what your competitive talent pool is and what they do on that stock exchange listing, go ahead and select it. Or, maybe you want to say only other privately held organizations. This is where you can make that selection. Today, I'm going to capture that broad average on these and leave them undefined. The last four groupings you see are just optional user-defined fields, so they will have no impact on your data whatsoever. But if you wanted to call a column header something other than what it is, that's really what these will give you the opportunity to do. So I'm going to save, and we just created a labor market together. And what I want to do today is compare these two. We're going to run a market report and see, how is industry, how is size competing for a job in the market. That's what the labor markets allow you to do. You can have as many labor markets as you want using that plus sign up at the top. Feel free to go ahead, come back in and add more when you're coming in and setting up your account. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move into your jobs and into the job section. And this is where we're going to do our benchmarking. So, of course, if you're following along with me, maybe your page looks a little different. You'll notice that mine is a full details view, which I find really helpful just in that case of, hey, maybe someone else benchmarked these jobs and you need to know what was the criteria that they searched for. So up above the table, you'll see there's this drop down to switch the view between the standard view, which is just a more concise column paragraph, giving you kind of the core details of a job. But if you want to get into the nitty gritty, I find the full details really helpful just to have that full bird's eye view to say, okay, I have some engineering titles. What were they benchmarked to? I can scroll over and just see all of the criteria like, oh, they didn't include skills or certifications. I know those are important. I can go back and fill those in, or double double checking, triple checking that the task list is still relevant to your job, making sure this is still an accurate benchmark for what your job is doing. So really helpful in that full details view. Also, this data can be downloaded out. So if you needed to send these jobs to perhaps the hiring manager to say, are these still accurate? Go ahead and select the row, or you can even come up to the column and select all if you're ready to go ahead and do that. And then you'll see that option to download those out into Excel or CSV. So great feature, get it out of the tool, share it in an email if it's like someone needs to double check with me on that benchmark. All right, so what we're going to do is go ahead and add in a new job together. Using that plus sign up at the top, we're going to add in a new title. And today I'm thinking about a principal software engineer. That's the role that I need. I've got a need on my team, so we can just use the job code as your internal title if you don't have job codes. It is a required field, but as you see, it does not need to be a unique code. It can just be your title. So make your life easy. If you don't use job codes, just use your titles just like this. All right, so salary grade. Of course, this is asking if we have a grade-based structure, if we're ready to slot this job, which we do not. So if you are in the same boat with me, then skip that question. You're also going to see optional fields in here if you wanted to include this information, but only again if it's relevant to you. All right, so now we're ready to search in the database. If you're following along with me, this is where you're really starting that search for what is that title out there in the market that I'm trying to benchmark my job to. And what you see coming up in this search are those benchmarks. So benchmarks are just what people across all organizations use for access to market data. And our task today is to try to find the benchmark that is the most like my job. So we want to get an apples to apples comparison in order for the data to be relevant to you, in order for it to be impactful for your employees. So that's what we're trying to find. Opening up the more tasks, you'll see there's more tasks for some jobs, so you can see more of their responsibilities associated with that job. So we can now see, okay, we've got 2 principal titles. What I like to do from here is use the link that says save for consideration. I'm just going to pull those up to the top. You know, maybe I want to compare this to like a software architect. Now I can change my keyword search. Still going to hold on to those titles that I was considering and pull those up to the top. So I find this type of side-by-side comparison to be really helpful to say, okay, now that I have a few titles, again, what's my job description? What is my job really doing? Which one of these is the best match? And the best practice for job matching is to say at least 70% of those core tasks are aligning to your job. So when we look at these bullet points here, we would want 3 out of 5 in order for this job to be relevant. So I know sometimes it's hard because the language is a little bit different and it's not exactly like your job description, but it's essentially like the gist of the job. Is the gist of the job the same? Is the job really similar or aligning to what your job is at your organization? We know it's really important to get those benchmarks accurate. So looking at that 70% match is really what we're looking for. So now I feel like, you know, software architect is a little too high level for what my job is doing. I think mine is actually this principal process engineer based off of what I know about my position. So I can go ahead and choose that. It is going to ask you to choose just one title. So unfortunately, you can't choose 2 or change elements and remove bullets. They are set as they are. So that's why it's important to find the one that you think is really the closest match. So we'll choose our title. And then we're going to further refine it on the second page. So already we see a big blue number here. This is connected to those labor markets that we just talked about. So I can already get an estimate of the 50th percentile just by changing these. It is truly an estimate. I always like to highlight that just because it's not the final number. It's not actually giving us our full report yet. So we're going to actually go through and further define this match together. And the first thing we'll talk about is years of experience. So I always like to highlight that the PayScale data set is really all about proficiency. So if you're used to benchmarking to your minimum requirements, I'm going to ask you to change your mindset here and think about proficiency. So by that I mean, how long does it take in someone's career? We're trying to measure how long does it take someone to become truly proficient at the level that you require. So oftentimes I know job descriptions are calling out that minimum, but we're asking you to think about, okay, after you hire someone on for the minimum, how long does it take for them to really master the tasks of that job? So oftentimes maybe a job description does call out a minimum, and maybe for today we could say our minimum is 5 years. But really, how long does it take to master the tasks of that job? So what we have off to our right sometimes is a really helpful graph for folks that maybe their job descriptions aren't giving them a hint at what does proficiency look like. Because what we have on our x-axis are what are those popular years of experience that people are reporting in this title. So we get to see that down on the x-axis. And then above it, we see what are those years of experience, where are those milestones? And the green bars identify where people out there in the market where we've identified, oh, there's a shift that happens as people reach a certain tenure mark. So as we're collecting that data from people, we're analyzing the trend to say, where are people seeing a shift? So that's what the green bars identify. You can hover over this to get a sense for what does it do or what does it mean. But it can be really helpful when it comes to identifying that proficiency point. So I'm going to say, 5 to 10 years is really my sweet spot for my particular job. That's what I consider proficiency for a principal process engineer. So that is going to be my years of experience. All right, so degree, of course, your education level, choose from the drop-down. Another way the tool is trying to be helpful here is to say, hey, we know the majority of profiles are reporting they have a bachelor's degree. So that's why PayScale recommends will show up here. But choose your true requirement. Moving on to supervisory role. Of course, this is calling out, is your job a people manager or is it a process manager? So for your jobs that are people managers, just more questions will come in, allowing you to get a pretty granular match. So again, think about this tool as if it's a funnel for data. So the more fields you enter, the more narrow your funnel for data becomes. I always like to say that, especially in regards to this question number supervised, is asking for that sum of the direct and indirect reports for this job. So if you know that number, absolutely input that here. But if you would rather capture a broad average of all, that's fine too, no problem. But I would encourage you to still refine what is that job's level of management. Maybe for me today, my job is just a team lead, so they're like an individual contributor, but they have a professional level of people management. They mentor and advise and assign and evaluate the work of others. So this would be that practice for those people managers. Coming down to skills and specialties, here we see some popular answers if they're relevant to my job, but I can search within the database to find those skills that I'm really looking for that are technical and driving pay for my job. So I would encourage you, again, not to think about the soft skills, like at this point, like I would consider Microsoft Excel a soft skill for someone at this level in their career. So I really want to think about what type of software languages are they using, because that's likely really important for this type of job. And you can have up to 7 here. And then finally, our last question is certifications or licenses. Do we have a requirement? Absolutely, use the same search functionality here, or if it's not a requirement, you can of course just skip that question. All right, so that is benchmarking. It is those 2 pages. There is a handout in that GoToWebinar for that exact function that we just walked through. I'm going to go ahead and save and create my report because I want to see data. If maybe you want to come back to it later, feel free to save it and come back to it and make your updates before you run the report. All right, so here is where I can select my labor market. So like I said before, I want to compare these 2 labor markets. So I'm going to select both. You will absolutely have the opportunity to select all, or even add a new labor market from here if you forgot when you were coming in from the very beginning. But let's go ahead and run those together. All right, so we are moved over to that market data section. I'm keeping my questions box. I haven't seen any questions come through, but just a reminder, you can go ahead and send me any questions you might have. But here I have 2 rows because I have 2 different market reports. Because, of course, a connection between a job title and a labor market equals 1 in terms of reports. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about report counts and how can you know exactly how many reports you have and so on. So that's something we are going to touch on. But here we can see, what is my internal result? What did I benchmark it to? Of course, we recognize our job code, and here's our display name for our labor market. So that's why I encourage people to come up with an easy convention for you, because it's going to show up on your market report. All right, so now here is that market spread. I see that from the 10th to the 90th percentile for the annualized market base pay. The tool functions a lot like Excel, so if you're a wizard at Excel, you'll be great in here. You can sort by any column by clicking on that column. But here's that 10th to the 90th percentile. I can see that difference for me at the 50th percentile to see, oh yeah, my engineering market is more competitive than my engineering services market. So really interesting and really important and helpful to have those labor markets set up. Notice a column here that says target market percentile. It is a default setting in the tool for it to default to the 50th percentile for all of our clients. That seems to be the most common strategy for a lot of folks. 50th percentile, of course, is just meeting the market right at the average. If you have a strategy that's maybe leading the market, like you see in my scenario, I'm leading the market at the 65th, that's my strategy. So I'm paying at the top 35% of the market for pay. So that's what's being pulled out in my annual base at target. There is a handout, again, in that GoToWebinar about how to change your target market percentile if that's relevant for you. If you know you have a strategy where you like to pay at the top of the market and you want to see that percentile broken out, you'll find that handout in the GoToWebinar. All right, so from here, if this is what you needed, the good news, you can just select the rows again and download those out. You can select all if you like and download those into Excel or CSV. But there's a few more views I want to show you. This drop down here in the center of the page is how you can change how you're viewing the table. So we were looking at the annualized base pay, but perhaps you want to see what is total cash compensation. That's what market TCC stands for. So the drop down allows you to switch the mode that you're looking at. So now instead of base, I'm looking at total cash. And a nice tip here, you can hover over any column. It'll tell you exactly what it means. So TCC is the sum of all cash payments in a given year. So same range, 10th to the 90th percentile for total cash. Another view that I really like is this market trends view. You know, this is connected to that hot jobs widget we saw at the top of the hour. So we can come in to see, you know, the tool is taking the snapshot of today and looking back 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 12 months ago to measure that change into, is this job heating up, or in this case, it looks like pay is cooling down. So this can be helpful for recruiting, or maybe you're doing some forecasting annually. All of this data in the tool, absolutely, I would love for you all to utilize it. So again, you can select those rows and download them out. So from here, we're going to talk about another report, and it's the detailed view. Every report will have one, and it's just going to give you some more context to what you're looking at. So we're going to go through, we're going to take a look at our detailed market report for our engineering market. So clicking on that orange link that says view if you're following along with me, so we could talk about the detailed report. All right, so up at the top, of course, it's just reminding us what job we're looking at, what labor market we're looking at. So we see for this job, there's different types of compensation being reported for this job. And we see that in the total cash, of course, the base, the bonus, there's profit sharing, there's even an hourly rate out there for this job. So what I always like to really highlight is the percentages in the bottom right-hand corner of each box. Those percentages are giving you an idea of how common are those different types of compensation. Maybe also giving you an idea of, hey, am I in the majority of people that are offering something like a base salary, or am I in the minority of people offering something like profit sharing? So those percentages, of course, are letting you know how common are those different types of compensation. And because those percentages are giving us a window into the percentage of that population, of course, that means that this box of bonus is only calculated based off of the 67% of profiles that are reporting that they get a bonus. That's how that's being populated. So what I'm getting at is a very common question that I receive here is, if you were to add up the 50th percentile across total cash, like bonus, profit sharing, and etc., you'll notice that it's not going to equal your total cash compensation box. And that is 100% okay, because again, each box is calculated based off of that percentage reported, so they'll never be able to equal each other, because not 100% of people are getting the exact same type of pay. So that's a really common question, especially if you're sharing this report with your hiring managers or your executives. Those percentages in the bottom right-hand corner really indicate that each box is calculated separately. So total cash compensation is going to be the average of all. So it'll never equal the other boxes. And I always like to double click on that because I would love for you all to be prepared if that comes up. There's also a report rating. And PayScale provides these ratings because I think it's important to talk about how consistent or how variable is pay. So whenever you see these, I find it helpful to think about the report rating as if we're putting the profiles that are taking up this report on a graph. And this report is getting a pretty high rating, so that graph is a pretty consistent bell curve. People are clustered together. There's not a lot of outliers in how people are being compensated. You will absolutely notice jobs that have a higher variability. That graph is more scattered. There's less clustering. People are getting paid. There's more variability. And so that's all that means. Doesn't mean the report is bad. It just means the job is more variable. And I know that's true for executive jobs or sales jobs, those types of positions that are typically very incentivized, typically have lower report ratings. I get a lot of questions like, how can I get a 5? You actually can't influence this. We can't influence this. It's the market that really indicates or makes the decision on how consistent or inconsistent is pay. But you can use this to know how is your job and how is it being paid in the market. All right, so we're going to scroll down. And if you're following along with me, I'm in this sidebar that says report details. I just have a few more things I want to show you, but this is where we are. And all of these are hyperlinks underneath this sidebar, so you can click into all of those. I like to start with the compensable factors. This is my favorite part of the tool. Of course, here's our job summary, so maybe you need to just copy and paste that into an email. I say go for it. But down below, I find this to be really helpful feedback, because what the tool is doing here, of course, we recognize all of our criteria here that we input for our job, but what the tool is doing for us is actually giving us a ranking system. So it's looking at all of that criteria and saying, okay, from most to least here, what's impacting pay the most? So title and location will always be the first, but then right below it, it's saying, the years of experience I'm looking for, the fact that I'm looking at for-profit companies, if I were to answer something like number supervised or certification, that might change my range. So it's a really helpful place to get, I think, a good gut check. Did you define these things really accurately, the things that are falling towards the top of the list? Because the tool is essentially giving you that feedback to say, these questions are important. Did you really get those right? So I think that's a great place to come in after you've benchmarked a job, just to see, or maybe say to that hiring manager, what is that number supervised? Because that might change the range. So all of these really great places to come and get that feedback. Over here, that sidebar again, we saw market trends before. Here it is in a graph. But a lot of times what people like to get into are these compensation influencer charts. So all of these links do the exact same thing. Which is hone in on a particular criteria and show you what would happen if you perhaps changed your report. So what we have, the graph above is the same information as the table below. You can hover over these, they're interactive. So I'm sure you're used to that functionality in the tool. But down below, what we're seeing is a comparison of our base salary search, which we see here. This is the same 50th percentile we saw on our previous page. But then down below it, what the tool is doing is essentially taking that number, and right now this graph is thinking about years of experience. And we've input our years of experience, say 10 years was our midpoint. And now what the tool is doing is saying, okay, what if I took that number 10 and made it less than 9 years? Or what if I made it more than 25 years of experience? it's giving us an estimate of what if everything stayed the same, but we just changed that one factor. So it is sometimes helpful for getting an estimate, truly, but it is an estimate. So I always say, if you're going to make pay decisions off of this, actually go back and change your benchmark, because it is going to be different. It's a different data model for these estimates versus the actual reports that you're running. But they can be helpful talking points if you're talking about years of experience with hiring managers, or maybe you're talking about skills and like what skills are really impactful. So every question that we see on that job matching page will have one of these graphs and tables for you to come in to see what would happen if, I feel like, is essentially what these questions are trying to answer. So this is a really helpful part of the tool. All of that in that sidebar that says report details, so you can spend potentially a lot of time in here. There is also a summary of common benefits, so you get to see, you know, what type of packages are people getting. Really helpful information. So we've talked about exporting data. You can export that Excel file out, but you can also download these. These are really popular, and you have two options for downloads. You have a custom report. The custom report is the long version. It's going to be every page of the sidebar, so it can be up to 30 pages long. You can dive into the data if you're really into data. If you just want a summary that is a little bit more concise, that's what I'm going to show you. The summary is 6 pages and really covers the highlights. And so I just want to show you what that's going to look like so you can know what to expect. So that'll just take a minute, and we can download it out or just print it in our browser. But let's go ahead and view our report. All right, so I'm sure you all won't be surprised at all to find out it'll look a lot like the website. So you're going to have those boxes to speak to about different types of comp, and now you're prepared to talk about those percentages in the bottom right-hand corner of each box. And we also see the job summary. So here is that list of factors again by precedent, so you can be prepared to talk about that, as well as benefits. The years of experience graph does come out because it's super popular. So if you liked that, that's great news. It'll come out on that summary report. And then the last page is about methodology. And I always like to zoom in here because, of course, methodology is important when people come over and ask you, where did you get this data from? I know that's going to happen. So this will always be the last page. And, you know, for those of you who aren't, maybe you haven't heard it in a while, of course, PayScale is crowdsourced data. So we are collecting data from people in their jobs in real time. So this page talks a little bit about that, but it also talks about how we scrub the data that we receive to make sure that it is accurate. So it talks about some of the steps we take that are automated, but it's also important to know that, you know, we have a data science team that reviews our data for any statistical outliers, and we really make sure to do a diligent job when it comes to the profiles that you have access to through this database. So it talks a little bit about that, and more importantly also about the algorithm that's looking for the profiles that are the most like your job, based off of those benchmarks and based off of those compensable factors that you have defined. So that is what this last page is here for, just to double click on who is PayScale, how do we collect data, how are we validating and giving you these market reports. So that'll always be the last page, no matter which report you download out. So I'm going to come up here to the top just to say, hey, if you've decided I've changed my mind, I want to change my labor market, or I want to change my job, here are two quick steps into that from here. So you don't have to go back to where we were. You can stay right here and edit your information. But I want to go back to my market reports for your jobs because I want to talk to you about the report count. How do I know how many I have, and how can I manage my report count number? All right, so this drop down here is showing me the number of true market reports that I have in this project, so 30. But what's interesting, of course, is I see there are 30, but I only see 2 right now. So where are my other reports? It's easy to miss. Like, I've gotten a lot of frantic emails, but it's right behind this show all filter. Sometimes the language says clear. So be on the lookout for that. It's actually not going to clear your data. It's just going to get rid of that filter that you're in. So now I could see all of my reports. So the fruit of all my labor here, I could download this out if I'm ready to get them all out into Excel. That's fantastic. Get them onto my desktop. So in terms of counting a report, again, a report counts when it's a title in a unique labor market. So today I ran 2 market reports. So in terms of maintaining that number, maybe you only bought a report pack of 25 and you're like, oh no, I could breeze through those pretty quickly. I'm here to give you a few really helpful ways to think about reports. So if you think about reports as slots, you have 2 options. Option 1 is you can reuse a slot at any time. So perhaps you've gotten the data you needed, you've downloaded this title out, and you can use the slot or reuse the slot for another job. So by that, I mean you could go back to your job code, you could change any criteria about this job, I could edit skills, I could add criteria, I could change the title to something else entirely. I'm just reusing the old slot and refreshing over my old data. So I can do that an infinite amount of times. There's no limit to the number of updates you can make to a job. So feel free to do that. You can edit, rerun those reports, turn it into another market report. The other option I have would be to remove a slot. So when you remove a slot, you're freeing up one, essentially. So by that, I mean, like for us today, if I go back to just maybe I can search for my principal title, I see my 2 ranges here, and I know that this engineering Seattle market is more aligned with my strategy. So I can now just remove this one that I no longer need. I was just doing some research, so now I can select and delete that. Of course, it's just double checking because it is going to be deleted. Just the market report will be gone, but I do want to do that, and that is subtracting. So if you want to, of course, you can do that. You can just remove those market reports, free up a slot for something else. Also, rest assured, the job is still here. I didn't delete the job. It still exists. So I could come back and rerun it at any time. It's just that I freed up that market report for something else. So those are the 2 ways to manage your report count. I really hope that's helpful for you. Let me know in that questions box if you have any other questions or challenges around that. So we're at the point in the presentation where I just want to show you a few more helpful things within the tool before we close up today. Just a reminder, if you do have any questions, please send them through. I'm keeping my eye on that questions box. But now I want to show you where you can get some help if you need help. There's a really great support center in this tool. And so up at the top next to your email address, you'll see this link for the support center. And that is chock full of helpful videos or quick guides for you if you want to know like what other things can I have access to within this tool. So the support center, there's some of those quick viewed videos on the sidebar. You can absolutely search in here if you're like wondering like, oh, I forgot what total cash means. All of that is in this support center. It's really great to have access to. I'm going to call out 2 tabs in particular. Of course, you're here in the product webinars right now, but there's some pre-recorded ones that I think would be super helpful for those of you who are just getting started. Like maybe you want to watch the Comp 101 or Comp 201 series. These are pre-recorded. You could watch them on your own time. You can even download the slides. So there are some great ones around job matching and labor markets. So all of that in that support center. The other tab I would call out is Comptopia. Comptopia is a really great user community of other HR professionals like yourselves who use PayScale. And I would point you to the discussion board. The discussion board is super, super popular. It's a great place to go when you have questions like, hey, what is everyone else doing for like number of paid holidays off? Or I'm trying to test out a new, like today, even we see like things like education assistance. It's a place where HR professionals are helping each other, giving each other advice and so on. So I always like to call that out. If you want to join that community, you absolutely have access, and you can access that through that support center. So I would point you to Comptopia or that product webinars as 2 great places to get more content. Of course, there's a modern Comp Hub if you need research papers or white papers, all of that in here for you. So lots of good stuff in there, and that's right next to your email. All right, so that's really all I had for us today. We have about 10 minutes until the top of the hour. So feel free to stick around if you have some questions and you want to to take them offline. But if you feel like you've gotten what you needed, feel free to jump off. That's really the end of the presentation. So thank you so much for joining.